So, guys, I want to talk about, if you want a title for this topic, it's Naphtali, Naphtali, or Naphtali, or however you want to pronounce it. So, Naphtali means wrestlings. Naphtali means to wrestle. And you find that in Genesis 30, verse 8, where I think it was Leah, or was it Rachel, who named her son Naphtali. Let's go read that. Genesis 30, verse 8. Rachel. So Rachel said, I've had a great struggle with my sister and I've won. And so she named him Naphtali, which means wrestling. So I want to talk about some of the things we have to wrestle into 2022, because there's a tendency, on December 31st for most pastors and most churches to preach out of Philippians 3:14, where it says, leaving the things that are behind and pressing in forward. I don't know whether Ben preached on that. If he did,
you came very close. We preached Philippians 4:4. Rejoice in the Lord always.
Oh yeah, the rejoice theme. Sorry, yeah. So 3:14 is a favorite pastoral New Year Eve service. They keep forgetting that they preached it last year also. And so every December 31st, the most commonly used scripture by most pastors all across the earth is Philippians 3:14. Putting things behind us and pressing into things that are ahead of us. But you really can't do that because you got to wrestle a whole lot of things from last year into this year. So let's look at the things that we need to wrestle into 2022. And I think I got 5 or 6 points to go over. One of the first wrestlings that we have to deal with is the very thing that Rachel dealt with. Rachel had a problem with her sister. And some of the things that we have to wrestle with into 2022 is, what do we do with people that we've had a problem with? How do we deal with that? Rachel actually was struggling with her sister. If you read Genesis 30, verse 6 or 34, so she gave him a servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her and she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel has said, God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son. Because of this, she named him Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, I've had a great struggle with my sister and I've won. So she named him Naphtali. And then Leah would start trying her tricks to bear children. And so one of the things you have to ask yourself is, how do I wrestle? What do I do with sisters and brothers or fathers and mothers or friends that I've had a problem with in 2021? Because on one hand, in 2 Corinthians 13, verse 11, it says that I must strive for full restoration. That's one part of the scriptures. See, the great thing about the Bible is you have to often hold things in tension. It's not either or, it is both. And one of the ways we know Christians that don't change are Christians that do not know how to hold things in tension. You meet many of them. Some are young, some are old. But things become so black and white for Christians sometimes. We should be black and white on fundamental issues, but we should not be black and white on non-fundamental issues. But Christians often take such a stance on that. And that is not justice. That is just stuck-upness. It's not either or, it's both. Things have to be held in tension. On one hand, God says, strive for full restoration. On the other hand, if I've had a problem with someone in 2021, I also have to go and see, okay, Father, so what are the parameters you're setting for my relationship with this person in the new year? Because sometimes God changes the configuration or the parameter of my relationship with people. So I have to go and look and see, Father, as I review this relationship, which didn't go well last year, what is it that you want to critique me on that I need to fix? Doesn't matter what it costs me. Doesn't matter that I might have to eat crow. I might have to be humble. I'll have to go and fix this part of it. What do you want me to review? And then after that, what do I have to reconfigure? Where are the new boundaries that you are setting? And then thirdly, Father, now that I've reconfigured the boundaries, now that you've shown me where I was wrong, now that you've told me where I had to go do something, what is the degree of reconciliation you want to bring? It's only after that that we can strive for full restoration. So as I'm talking, you will think of a few people that you've had to wrestle with in 2021, and it didn't finish well. Sometimes it's our own relatives, eh? Fathers and mothers too, sisters and brothers, children. If it's children, then know that as a parent, the onus is on you because it's the fathers that turn towards the children, not the children that turn towards the fathers. So that's the first wrestling that spills over from 2021 into 2022. So I have a couple of broken relationships in 2021, and I've been struggling with them because I've got to find a new set of boundaries, a new way of looking at those relationships. I can't let them go. I have to do whatever is required to fix them, not fix them and try to bring them back to the same place that they were. Oh, Father, what does version 2.0 look like? The only problem with Zoom is it's so hard to talk back, right? But that is something you have to examine. Eh? Jesus had to do this. Eh? On one hand, from when he was 12, after he got lost in the after his parents thought he was lost in Jerusalem when he was at the temple, it says from then on Jesus was super obedient, kept to whatever they told him to, grew up at home, and then you see at the wedding in Cana, and thereon you see Jesus changes in his relationship with his mom and probably his dad. We don't know much about his dad, but with Mary, his relationship begins to change. You see the same happening with Paul and Barnabas. You see the same happening with Paul and Mark. And you see the same thing happening with Mark later on in the book of Philemon. We try to recapture relationships and try to bring them back to version 1.0 when sometimes things need to change. Do you know that your relationship with Jesus is constantly changing? That is being reconfigured? That the ultimate intent of God with Israel was always striving for full restoration. But as you go through the first 30 whatever books in the Old Testament, you see that his relationship has to be reconfigured because of where Israel is at. But he is always striving towards full restoration. That should be the ultimate intent, that I will strive towards full restoration. But in the process, Father, what do I need to review? Why don't you critique my flaws in this relationship so I can fix them? Why don't you help me reconfigure new boundaries? Hey, remember this, that there was not a single person who made any significant impact in the Old Testament and the New Testament that did not have to reconfigure relationships with family. Not one. Not one. Not one. And for us, Mallus and Tamilians, which I am assuming makes the majority of One Dubai, this is super hard, eh? We are so clannish that to break out of this is like real wrestling, like WWE. At least that is false. This is real. The next wrestling is wrestling with God into 2022, especially with wrestling with God in regards to the prophetic words spoken over you in 2021. So everything that was spoken in 2021 is supposed to transpire in 2022, 2023, and forward. That is the nature of the prophetic word. It's spoken from the future. So if it's spoken from the future in 2021, you're supposed to become it in 2022. But to become it 1 Timothy 1:18 has to go into effect. And 1 Timothy 1:18 is when Paul says to Timothy that, hey, Timothy, fight well with the prophetic and the word that has been spoken over you. Fight well by being changed by the word and changed with the word. So this idea of warring with or fighting with or wrestling with the word that has been spoken over you so that it shapes you. So one of the common things in Dubai or any part of the Middle East is every prophet visits Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Bahrain and all those places for different reasons. And so we all get different prophetic words. And we really receive them with great joy, but nothing happens after that because the word has to change us. The word that was spoken has to change us. So has that been happening? Have you been allowing yourself to wrestle with what was being said? If God said you're going to be a distributor of wealth, then last year, did you start distributing it? Or did you fall for the old trick which says, I'll collect it so that in the future I can distribute it? If God said, I don't want you to be a soldier anymore, I want you to be a ruler, did you shift from using the sword to extending a scepter? If God said, I don't want you to be a nurse anymore, I want you to be a fireman, did you stop being a comfort and a healer and start being a rescuer? And if you say you did, then what did you do to get there? How did you transform from being a nurse to a rescuer? What did you do? What did you change in your thinking and your character? It's easier if we work with the word. Otherwise, we have to spend 40 years in the back of Sinai before God changes Moses into a humble man. And then you have to see, look at the process. On one hand, you had Moses who had to spend 40 years in the back of the Sinai before he had the humility to be confronted by the burning bush. But the change that happened from the burning bush to the burning mountain, Mount Sinai, was much shorter. Why? Because there it was the word that was changing Moses. While in the desert for 40 years, it was not the word, it was the experience of life that was changing him. Most Christians change only because they have paid too high a cost or because experiences have made them change. But what if the word changed us? So one of the things you have to wrestle with, and I do this every year, and I've said this to us before, and I say it again. One of the things I do at the end of the year or the beginning of the year is to go back and look at everything that I know was genuine from God and was spoken over me. So now can I take it? And Father, now that I see what you're asking of me, what are the new habits that I must cultivate? And what are the old habits that I must cast away so that you can have the Jacob you wanted? It's hard work, guys. And God would prefer that we become what he wants us to become within time frames. He prefers that we function within time frames because he has an appointed time for everything. Sometimes it doesn't work out. If it doesn't work out, that's fine. But he'd prefer, not that's fine. If it doesn't work out, he gives us another shot at it or he repeats it again and again till it works out. But he would prefer that I function within time frames. The third, wrestling. And we're never too old to start this, So you can start it any time you want. Third, wrestling that spills over into 2022 is wrestling with spiritual forces of darkness. Wrestling with spiritual forces of darkness. And Ephesians 6:12 talks about it. And one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, okay, so when I look back at last year, can I identify the Goliaths and the demons that were assigned to me that seem to have the upper hand? Can I identify the Goliaths and the demons that were assigned to me, not by God, but by the enemy? Can I identify demons and Goliaths that were assigned to me that seemed to get the upper hand, that seemed to have beaten me? I seem to have few victories, they seem to have most of the victories. Because the same thing will happen again in 2022. Man, December 31st, 12 p.m. does nothing to the spirit realm. They don't go Happy New Year. They usually go, same New Year again. Groundhog Day. So what were the demons that seemed to beat me last year? What were the Goliaths that I was not able to overcome? Was it laziness? Was it fear? Was it mediocrity? Was it lust? Was it liking this idea of being isolated? Was it being an authority unto myself? Was it bouts of discouragement? Was it aloneness? Was it shame? Was it anger? Was it gossip? Was it self-centeredness? What was it? What did I lose to repeatedly? See, Satan knows patterns. Huh? So as long as I don't break a pattern, he's willing to repeat it because he knows that this bait works. And because we as Christians live highly private lives instead of public community lives, and COVID has really helped with that, it is possible to not let anyone else know that the Goliaths in our lives. Think about real Christianity. Sin is not your own business. Your sin is no longer your business. Your sin has now become my business too. That is why we are scared to live a life that is built along the lines of actual community of the Spirit. Because the moment I do that, my sin becomes your business. And you have a right to call me on it. You have a right to, well, if you call me on it, you have a right to help me with it. Scary, eh? If you began living like that. The next wrestling is wrestling off any sin that has held on to me tightly. Wrestling off any sin that has held on to me tightly. As in, I'm not talking about Goliaths that beat me. Those are emotions or work situations or usual predicaments to which I always would react a certain way, or fears that I have. Now I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about wrestling with certain sins in my life. I remember saying this to the church here some time ago that, man, there are sins that have somehow continued in my life for 30 years, man. That's crazy for a believer, for a child of God, for someone who's been a believer for this long, for certain sins to persist for 30 years. That is nuts. And some of you are not 30, so blessed are you. But for the rest of us who are older, it's crazy how certain things are not beat. So wrestling off any sin that holds tightly, and Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 talks about that. Hey, begin to run the race in a way where you're not entangled in that sin that keeps persisting. So one of the things I'd suggest, and this is a gutsy prayer, so don't pray it if you're not sure. But invite God's discipline. Don't chumma do it. He'll actually believe you. So invite God's discipline in certain areas of your life where there are certain sins that you haven't been able to shake off. It's almost become part of your nature, which is terrible, because our nature is not sinful after we got born again. but it is like carrying a cadaver that you can't get rid of. And so, what if I invited discipline? And when I say discipline, it usually frightens every Christian. But what if we saw discipline as initially instruction, correction, rebuke? And that usually, and pruning, as in, I don't know anything about gardening, but I found that pruning is basically cutting off some of the ends of a branch so that it bears more fruit. All that happens through the word, guys. It's not these four things that I said: instruction, correction, rebuke, and pruning actually happens through the word. It's the word of God that is used. Sometimes it's a word that is used while you're reading. Other times it's through the pastor. Other times it's through a friend. Rebuke from God usually comes through people. One of the ways to make sure that you don't grow and you're never disciplined is to make sure that you keep your life healthily at a healthy distance from other Christians and from the pastor. COVID is ideal for these things. Instruction, correction, rebuke, and pruning happens through the word. And only after that is unpleasant discipline an option. That is when God can sometimes raise opposition against you, raise adversaries against you, sometimes allow sifting to happen. But I've been inviting God to discipline me in certain areas, saying, "Oh God, I invite your discipline because I really want to change. I'm getting older and I cannot continue with these sins in my life. So discipline me where necessary." And the other thing you can do is ask God to ask you to sell things that are causing you to stumble on a regular basis, that are preventing you from pursuing Him. In Mark 10:21, Jesus said to the ruler, "One thing you lack, go sell it if you really want to follow me." So, what is that one thing that I need to sell? Is it pride? Is it lack of discipline? Is it privacy? Is it, what is it? What is the one thing that's preventing me from fully going full throttle behind Jesus? I hope you can actually answer these questions. Say, one of the problems with having church every Sunday is that next Sunday there'll be another brilliant sermon. And so you don't get time to work on this one. But I hope I can guilt you enough to make you answer these questions so that at least you have the answers. Whether you work on them or not is a whole other ball of wax, but at least answer the questions. One of the ways to do that is to invite me again next Sunday so I can ask you about it. But don't worry, Ben won't do that. The next one is wrestling to enter rest. Wrestling to enter rest. So when you look back at 2011, was it a restful year? Was it a restful year? As in, was it a year where you operated almost entirely by listening to what the Holy Spirit was saying, and therefore only did what you were asked to by God? And it wasn't that you didn't work harder, that you weren't diligent, but it was a very restful year. Didn't matter what happened, you would go and ask God, "Hey, Father, what do I do in this situation?" And He would tell you, and you would just do that. It was hard work walking around Jericho every day, but it was restful because they didn't have to do anything. On the seventh day, they took a city by shouting. That is all they did. It was restful. So, what kind of year was it last year? Was it Peter and his friends fishing throughout the night and catching nothing? Or was it cast your net on the other side and now you can't pull the fish in? What kind of year was it? One of the things we have to learn is to make sure that 2021, if it wasn't restful, isn't continuing into 2022. For some of us, last year was not restful because we were given promises by God. We had expectations that God would do this or God would do that, and our expectations and and those promises didn't happen, didn't materialize, and it's only created restlessness and resentment and travail instead of peace. Sometimes, guys, you have to wrestle against things that prevent you from getting to God, who is rest. Sometimes the problem with Pentecostal churches, NLAG church kind of churches, Assembly of God churches, is that we have so many promises that our entire life is tossed into turmoil when the promises don't come to pass. Because the promise becomes the bullseye that we are aiming at. It's so sad when a promise that is given to you doesn't bring you to a place of rest, but a place of resentment. Doesn't bring you to a place of peace, but a place of just panic and turbulence. So one of the things you have to try and do this year, and it's such an odd phrase, to wrestle to enter into rest. Hebrews 4 verse maybe 11 or thereabouts puts it the same way. Strive to enter into rest. Strive to enter into rest. It's these two words that are actually almost paradoxical. You can't put them together, or oxymorons, but you're fitting them together. Wrestle or strive to enter into rest. Because we are so used to doing things our way, and using our human strength and human wisdom to get things done. God is saying, will you stop? Will you please stop? Will you let me do it by telling you exactly what to do, and you don't do a word, nothing more? I mean, simple thing like going to LA this afternoon. I'd booked my tickets because I was supposed to do this day and a half conference there. And then started feeling that God saying, cancel. And I have no good reason to cancel. And so I was texting Chad yesterday morning and saying, don't know what to do. I just have this sense that I should cancel. And he said, yeah, I think you should cancel and you should not go. And so yesterday around 12 in the afternoon, I canceled the ticket, little knowing that the entire church had suffered from COVID. Rest is his ability not to go into panic, not to go into trying to reason things out, not using your human wisdom, not using your human strength, but just following the lead of the Holy Spirit, trusting that what he's saying is how it's going to happen. You don't need, you're not able to explain why. People probably will laugh at you a little or think you're too cowardly or fearful. But at the end of the day, rest is such an amazing way to live, because you only do what you're told and the rest works out. What if we lived like that? Or do you want a continuation of 2021? Man, I look forward to walking in such rest this year, because in rest, you accomplish far more than you could have done through striving. Taking Jericho would have been so difficult any other way. Rest goes against the grain of normal thinking. Why would you whittle down your army from 30,000 to 300? Rest makes God evident through your life, because nobody can see anything but God, because it wasn't your human wisdom or human strength. Rest shows your God off. Rest brings you things that you could never earn, never deserve. Rest is you saying, Father, I really believe you know best. I'll obey. I'll hear, I'll do. Rest is a formula for tremendous fruitfulness. It's not the absence of a work ethic. It is the presence of God. This was what he was trying to teach Israel in the desert when he said, hey guys, I know you feed yourself every day, you have to work for your daily wages, but please Can you give me Saturday so that you don't work and I'll provide you twice as much? And they couldn't. And we can't either. And he's saying, can you guys be different? Cool. 2 more and we're done. Wrestling with the spirit. One of the things we have to do is wrestle with the spirit. Whenever you wrestle with the spirit, you always lose. So the idea is to abandon yourself, surrender, and be carried wherever he wants to go. Wrestling with the spirit is basically abandoning yourself, surrendering yourself, and being carried by the spirit, sometimes to places you don't want to go. In John 21:18, Jesus says to Peter that when you were small, you could dress yourself up and do what you wanted. But now that you have grown up, you will stretch your hands and someone will bind your hands and they will take you where you do not want to go. And after he says that, he says, follow me. And so wrestling with the spirit is asking the spirit to end your self-determination. Just listen to those words. Huh? The moment you got born again, the moment you got saved, nobody tells you this, huh? Because if we told them this before they got saved, they won't get saved. So salvation is the beginning. The beginning of salvation is the end of self-determination. The moment you get saved, self-determination ends, as in you no longer have the right to decide what you will do with your life. This is why we don't preach it before salvation. Salvation is the end of your right to determine what you do with your life, because it no longer belongs to you. I preached a sermon about a month and a half ago here. And basically the idea of the sermon was that you do not belong to yourself. You belong to Christ and you belong to us. See, the first part was easy. You do not belong to yourself. Yeah, we can accept that. You belong to Christ. Even that is acceptable because he's invisible. That's an easy one. But then the next line is the line everybody dislikes. You do not belong to yourself. You belong to Christ and you belong to us. You belong to us. That is a frightening thing to say. Don't worry, we won't go there today. So wrestle with the Spirit so that many things in this year will be you saying, I was compelled by the Spirit. And I just was compelled by the Spirit. I felt I didn't have a choice. I was just grabbed by the Spirit. This used to happen to guys in the Old Testament. How much more so in the New Testament? It happened to Ezekiel. It happened to Jeremiah. It happened to Isaiah. I mean, who do you think led Jesus into the wilderness? The words there are not compelled by the Spirit, but it very clearly says, and the Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness. This is when life is no longer in your control. And when it is no longer in your control, that is when it gets really interesting. Because things begin to happen that you could not even imagine. The more you behave like this, the more you surrender to the beckoning of the Spirit, the more you become part of Hebrews chapter 11. The more you enter into adventures of God. This is what Ezekiel 47 talks about when it says, and so when I stepped into the water was up to my ankles, then up to my knees, then up to my waist. And then the best thing is, and the scary thing is, you no longer can see the bottom of the river. And now you don't know what you're stepping into because you don't know whether the next step is 6 feet deep or 3 feet deep. And then you find out it is 6 feet deep and that you can't even stand. Now you're being carried at the mercy of the current. The only thing you know is that this current does not destroy. This current does not drown you. It doesn't kill you, but it will scare you because you no longer are in control. And now God works begin. Where flesh ends, God begins. This is why in John 6:63, Jesus says, I think it's 60, maybe it's not. John 6:63, let's go with that for now. It says, the flesh profits nothing, but the spirit gives life. It is so worth it, guys. Try it. But then you'll have to take this teaching that I'm giving you and go over it and then have conversations with God. This doesn't happen by listening to a teaching. Let me assure you, listening to this teaching is like a man who goes and looks into a mirror and walks away not knowing what he looks like. But if you went over this teaching and then transacted business with God, that would be a whole different thing. That is when these things are initiated. I plead with you, man. This message is for the beginning of the year. Try and go down this route. It will benefit you. It'll be painful in certain areas, but so what? Someone told me this long ago. You either pay upfront or you pay with interest later. Guaranteed. Huh? Last one. Wrestling to steward what God is placing in your hands this year. Wrestling to steward what God is placing in your hands this year. So I was listening to a radio show here. For those of you who don't know what a radio is, this is little brown box from which noise comes. Some of you were born after. So, and on this radio, there was this woman talking about language spoken by First Nations people here. And there are only 4 fluent speakers of the language. And the 4 fluent speakers of the language are quite old, and they are carriers of the oral tradition of these tribes. And if they die, then with them dies a repository of culture and history that has come down the ages. And they're just 4 fluent speakers. And so this lady has decided that her job is to steward this language and teach it to at least another 1,500 to 3,000 people, so that the history and the culture of a tribe does not die. And she's going around trying to raise money to build schools to teach children a language that is dying, with only 4 people left in the entire universe. I'm thinking to myself, my God, man, the effort she's putting in. I'm saying to myself, Father, so what have you given us to steward as a church in this city? And what have you given me to steward as a believer in this life? And what am I supposed to steward this year? What am I supposed to take care of like it was my own child? What is the cost I have to pay to raise this thing that you have given me to steward? And that's a question you need to ask and you have to wrestle with. You know, we love the word steward, but the problem with the word steward is the moment you think of steward, you have to think of the fact that stewarding requires paying a cost and stewarding requires being accountable. So what is the portion of the inheritance God is giving you this year as a church in Dubai? And what is the portion of the inheritance that God is giving you as an individual that you are supposed to steward? Are you honoring it? Anyone who does not honor an inheritance given to you will eventually lose it. Hear me again. Anyone who does not honor the inheritance given to you will eventually lose it. You see that with the children of really rich billionaires across the earth. They get all this money and they do not know how to steward it because they have absolutely no value that they assign to it because they did not earn a cent of it. The cool thing about an inheritance is you cannot ever acquire it without relationship. An inheritance is never acquired through earning it, through stealing it, through standing first in line, nothing like that. It comes purely through relationship. And so I pray, God, that you go down that route. We are going down that road right now. So, Father, as a church, what is our inheritance that you are apportioning to us at this time? We don't want all of it right now. We don't want to be a prodigal who wants the entire thing, because we will squander it because we're not ready for it. But this year, what is it that you have for us in Vancouver? Show us, Abba. Allow us to phrase it and write it down in simple words and write it on a signboard so that anyone who sees can run with it. It is for an appointed time such as this. It will not tarry. So show us, Abba. And you can ask for this as a church and you can ask for it as individuals. I asked for it as an individual. You can't read it from here, but I've got a board there. I think you can see it at some point. You see that board has everything that's going to happen to me this year. I've got it written there. And the reason I've left it on that board is every morning I wake up, every afternoon, I got to keep reading it, because in reading it, I'll know that, Jacob, this is what is appointed to you this year. Walk in it, walk in it, walk in it. I've read it about 7-8 times today. Hey, why do all this hard work? Can't God do it without? Yes, he can. But what needs to be changed in the process is this. This thing, if it doesn't change, no, God will have to do miracles. If this thing changes, God can work with you. Otherwise, God will have to just be miraculous through you. Sometimes God is tired of being miraculous through you, saying, please, can you work with me? Do I continuously have to use you as a miracle? Can you just be my partner? But to be a partner, one has to agree with God. To agree with God, we got to think like God. Can two walk together except they be agreed? Can two walk together except they think alike? Otherwise, God has to continuously use me as a miracle, a sign, and a wonder. But when I begin to think like God, people begin to see God close up. You begin to telescope God. This is why it is said of Moses that Israel knew God's acts. Moses knew his ways.